The phone was wedged between my ear and my shoulder as I chopped the carrots, the rhythmic thump of the knife against the cutting board a familiar comfort. Claire's voice was a thin, reedy thing on the other end, so unlike her usual bright chatter. She was telling me about the promotion she hadn't gotten, and with every word, I could feel the weight of her disappointment pressing down on the line. "It's fine, Mom," she said, but it wasn't fine. I had raised her. I knew the difference between her "it's fine" and her actual fine. This was the "it's fine" that meant she had been crying in the bathroom at work. This was the "it's fine" that meant she was questioning everything she had ever believed about hard work and fair play. "Claire, honey, you have to tell me what happened," I said, pausing my chopping. "You said Mark got it." "Mark who? The one you've been training?" "That's the one," she said, and I could hear her take a shaky breath. "He's been here a year, Mom." "A year?" "I've been on that project for 2. He took my ideas, he presented them to the client, and now he's the golden boy. I'm just the assistant." "Did you talk to your manager? You need to fight for yourself, sweetheart." She laughed, a short, bitter sound that was nothing like my daughter. "Fight? With what?" "Mom, my integrity. He didn't steal my ideas in a way I can prove. He's just charming. He goes to the right dinners, plays golf with the senior vice president. I just work." My hand tightened on the knife. I wanted to reach through the phone and hug her, but I also wanted to find this Mark person and give him a piece of my mind. I was 60 years old, and I had seen enough of the world to know that charm could be a weapon, but it didn't make it any less painful when it was used against your own child. "Listen to me," I said, my voice firmer than I felt. "You are brilliant. You always have been. This is a setback, not the end. You get back up, you dust yourself off, and you show them what you're made of. You always have." "I know, Mom," she said, and the words were softer now, a little less sharp. "I'm just tired. I'm going to go for a run, clear my head. We'll talk later, okay, honey. I love you. I love you too." The line went dead. I stood there for a moment, the knife still in my hand, the half-chopped carrots forgotten on the board. I felt that familiar ache in my chest, the one that came when I couldn't fix something for my children. I had spent my whole life fixing things: skinned knees, broken toys, schoolyard disputes. But this was a grown-up hurt, and it was bigger than a Band-Aid or a home-cooked meal. The doorbell rang. I wiped my hands on my apron and shuffled to the front door, my mind still on Claire. The courier was already halfway back to his van by the time I opened it. He was a young man with a tired face, and he didn't even look back. There was no signature required, just a plain brown box, about the size of a shoebox, sitting on the welcome mat. It was addressed to my husband, Robert. I bent down and picked it up. It was heavier than I expected, and when I shook it, there was no rattle. It felt like paper or folders. I carried it inside, setting it on the kitchen counter next to the chopping board. I glanced at the return address. It was a company name I didn't recognize, some logistics firm. I shrugged and went back to my carrots. Robert was still at work. He worked for a logistics firm himself, a senior account manager. He had been there for over a decade, a steady job with steady pay. It wasn't glamorous, but it was reliable. That was Robert. Reliable. Predictable. It was what I had loved about him when we were young, and it was what I had come to rely on as we got older. Our life was a quiet rhythm: workdays, weekends at the garden center, quiet evenings in front of the television, and the occasional dinner with the neighbors. It wasn't exciting, but it was ours. When Robert finally came home, the sun was starting to set. I heard his key in the lock and the familiar shuffle of his feet. He hung his coat on the rack, loosened his tie, and walked into the kitchen with a sigh that seemed to come from somewhere very deep. "Rough day?" I asked, looking up from the stove. I was making his favorite, a simple roast chicken. "Long day," he corrected, offering a tired smile. He glanced around the kitchen, his eyes scanning the counters. They landed on the box. "Did something come for me?" "Courier brought it this afternoon," I said, pointing with my spatula. I didn't open it. It looked official. He walked over and picked it up, turning it over in his hands. He read the return address, and I watched his face. It was a subtle thing, but I saw it. A flicker of surprise, then a flash of recognition, and then something else, something darker that was there and gone in a split second. He had always been a bad liar. After 30 years of marriage, I knew his face better than he knew it himself. "It's from the office," he said, his voice a little too flat. "Some administrative thing. Don't worry about it." He tucked the box under his arm and turned to leave the kitchen. "Don't you want to open it?" I asked, a little confused. "It might be important." "Later," he said, already halfway down the hall. "I need to check a few things. I'll be out in a bit." He walked into his study and closed the door behind him. I stood there, holding the spatula, and the quiet click of the door seemed louder than it should have been. It was a strange sound, the sound of a door closing on a conversation. On a secret. Robert never did that. He came home, he talked to me, he complained about his day, he asked about mine. That was our ritual. It was one of the small, steady things that held our life together. And tonight, he had broken it. At dinner, he was quiet. I asked him about his day, and he gave me one-word answers. "Fine. Busy. Same old." He pushed his food around his plate, barely eating. I watched him, and I felt a little knot of unease tighten in my stomach. I tried to think of an explanation. Maybe he was worried about Claire too. Maybe he'd had a bad day at work that he didn't want to talk about. Maybe he was just tired. "Did Claire talk to you today?" I asked, hoping to draw him out. "She called me this afternoon. She was really down about that promotion." He finally looked up from his plate. "She'll be fine," he said. "She's strong. Like her mother." He attempted a smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. It was a paper-thin smile, the kind you give a stranger. She said her colleague, Mark, got it. "She's been working on that project for 2 years, Robert." She was sure it was hers. He shrugged. "These things happen. It's not about what you know, it's about who you know. She'll learn that." He said it with such a bitter certainty that I felt a chill go down my spine. It wasn't like him to be so cynical. He was usually the one telling her to believe in the system, to play by the rules. "Since when did you become such a pessimist?" I asked, trying to keep my voice light. He didn't answer. He just stared at his plate, his jaw tight. I let it go. We finished dinner in silence. I cleared the dishes, and he went back to his study. I heard the click of his desk lamp and the soft rustle of paper. He was opening the box. I stood in the kitchen, my hands in the warm, soapy water, and I felt a question form in my mind. What was in that box, and why was he hiding it? I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being excluded from my own life. It was a strange, hollow feeling, like I was standing on one side of a glass wall and watching the rest of the world go by. I wiped my hands on the towel, walked to the study door, and knocked gently. "Robert, are you okay? Just working on some paperwork," he called back. His voice was strained, tight. "I'll be out in a bit." I leaned my forehead against the doorframe. I knew his lies as well as I knew his face. He was a terrible liar. He always had been. He would avoid your eyes, his voice would get just a little too tight, and he would over-explain things. I had heard that tightness in his voice on the phone, and I was hearing it again. I walked back to the living room and sat down on the sofa. I stared at the television, but I didn't see it. My hands were cold. I was thinking about the past few weeks. He had been coming home later than usual. When I asked, he said he was working on a major client account, something with a pharmaceutical company. He was also more protective of his phone, keeping it face down on the table, taking it with him to the bathroom. I had brushed it off as work stress, but now all those small, strange behaviors were lining up in my mind like a row of dark soldiers. They were forming a picture. I just didn't know what the picture was. An hour later, he came out. He looked exhausted, the bags under his eyes darker than before, his shoulders slumped. He sat down on the sofa next to me, but he didn't reach for my hand. He just stared at the blank television screen. "Robert, what's going on?" I asked, my voice softer than I intended. "You're scaring me." He let out a long, shaky breath. "It's nothing," he said, but his voice was hollow. He reached over and took my hand, but his was cold. "I just have to work a little extra for a while. It's complicated." "You know you can talk to me," I said. "About anything." He looked at me then, his eyes searching my face. For a moment, I thought he was going to break. The wall was going to come down, and he was going to tell me what was eating at him. I could see the struggle on his face, the war between his pride and his fear. But then his phone buzzed. He pulled it out of his pocket and looked at it, and his whole body tensed. "I have to take this," he said, already standing up. "It's about the client. I'll be up in a few hours." He walked back to the study and closed the door behind him. I heard the murmur of his voice through the wood, but I couldn't make out the words. I sat there in the dark living room, and my hands started to tremble. A tear rolled down my cheek, and I was surprised by it. I hadn't cried in a long time. My life was stable, secure. I had a home, a husband, a family. I didn't have reasons to cry. But I was crying now, sitting in my own living room, listening to the muffled sound of my husband's voice through a closed door. I went upstairs alone and lay in the dark, listening to the faint sound of Robert's voice coming from downstairs. I couldn't sleep. I was 60 years old, and I had never felt more alone in my own house. I had thought I knew my husband. I had built my life on that certainty. And now, in one evening, with one simple package, that certainty was gone. The bed felt too big, the room too quiet. I must have drifted off, because I woke up to the sound of a car driving by on the street outside. The clock on the nightstand said 2:30 in the morning. Robert still wasn't in bed. I got up, my feet bare on the cold floor, and walked down the stairs. The house was dark except for a sliver of light coming from under the study door. I pushed it open quietly. Robert was asleep at his desk, his head resting on his arms. The box was open, and there were papers scattered across the desk. I crept closer, my heart pounding in my ears. I could see a letter with a corporate letterhead, a name I didn't recognize. And there was a single photograph, face down. I carefully reached over him and picked it up. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold it. I turned the photo over. It was a picture of Robert, shaking hands with another man in an expensive-looking office. They were both smiling, like old friends. The other man was young, maybe in his late 20s, with an easy smile and a tailored suit. He looked like the kind of man who was used to getting what he wanted. My eyes drifted back to the letterhead on the desk. It was from a logistics firm, a competitor of Robert's company. And then I looked more closely at the letter. It was addressed to Mr. Robert Caldwell, but the company's name was something else entirely. It was the name of my daughter's company. The company that had just promoted Mark over Claire. I felt the floor tilt beneath me. My mind was reeling, trying to connect the dots, but they were scattered, disjointed. What was Robert doing with a man from Claire's company? Why was it a secret? Why was he hiding papers and photos in a study in the middle of the night? A cold, unwelcome thought crept into my mind. What if Robert wasn't just keeping secrets from me? What if he was keeping secrets from Claire too? What if he was the reason she had lost her promotion? I looked at the date on the letter. It was 3 weeks ago. 3 weeks ago, Claire had been studying for a big presentation. 3 weeks ago, she had been so full of hope. And her father, her own father, had been shaking hands with a stranger, smiling like a co-conspirator. I put the photo back exactly where I had found it. I stepped out of the study, my legs weak, and leaned against the wall in the hallway. My heart was racing, my thoughts a tangled mess. I couldn't sleep, but I couldn't confront him either. Not yet. I needed to think. I needed to understand. I needed to find out if the man I had married was the man I thought he was, or if he had been a stranger all along. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, going over every detail in my mind. The photograph, the letterhead, the late-night phone calls, the way Robert had been guarding his phone like a state secret. The pieces were all there, scattered on the table of my mind, but I couldn't see the picture they formed. I only knew that it was a picture I didn't want to see. When the first gray light of dawn crept through the curtains, I got up. I moved quietly, not wanting to wake Robert, who had finally come to bed sometime after 3. He was still asleep, his face slack, looking older than his 58 years. I looked at him for a long moment, this man I had shared a life with for 3 decades, and I felt like I was looking at a stranger. I went downstairs and made coffee. The house was quiet, too quiet. Every creak of the floorboards seemed to echo. I sat at the kitchen table, cradling my warm mug, and I made a decision. I wouldn't confront him. Not yet. I needed more information. I needed to understand what I was dealing with before I said a word. Robert came down an hour later, looking haggard and drawn. He ran a hand through his thinning hair and sat down across from me. I poured him a cup of coffee and set it in front of him. Couldn't sleep, he asked, his voice hoarse. A little restless, I said, keeping my voice even. You were up late yourself. Work, he said, the word a sigh. It never ends. I nodded, as if I understood. I watched him over the rim of my mug, and I saw his hand tremble just slightly as he lifted his coffee to his lips. He was nervous. He was hiding something, and he knew I was watching. Robert, I said, keeping my voice light, I'm going to see Claire today. She sounded so upset yesterday. She needs her mother. He nodded absently. That's a good idea. Tell her to keep her chin up. She'll land on her feet. She works so hard at her job, I said, probing gently. It's such a shame about that promotion. I wonder what went wrong. He shrugged, his eyes fixed on the table. Office politics. She's young. She'll learn. She said Mark got the job, I continued. Do you know him, Mark, the one who got the promotion? Robert's hand tightened around his mug. The movement was subtle, almost imperceptible, but I saw it. I don't really know her coworkers, he said. I've met a few at the company picnic a few years ago, that's all. He was lying. I knew it with a certainty that settled in my bones like ice water. The man in the photograph, the man shaking Robert's hand, had been young, well-dressed, with a confident smile. He looked exactly like the kind of man who would charm his way into a promotion he didn't deserve. I was almost certain it was Mark. I didn't push further. I just kissed him on the cheek and left. Claire's apartment was small but tidy, just like she was. She lived in a part of town that was popular with young professionals, all glass and steel buildings and trendy coffee shops. I parked my car and walked up to her door, my stomach in knots. I didn't know what I was going to say to her. I didn't know how to ask the questions that were burning in my mind. She opened the door, and my heart broke. Her eyes were puffy, red-rimmed. She had been crying, probably all night. She was wearing an old sweatshirt, her hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. She looked like a little girl, not a 30-year-old woman with a career and a life of her own. Oh, honey, I said, pulling her into a hug. Come on. Let's have some tea. We sat in her small kitchen. I made tea, the same way I'd made it for her since she was a teenager, with a splash of milk and a little bit of honey. She wrapped her hands around the mug and stared at the steam rising from it. I'm sorry, Mom, she said, her voice small. I didn't mean to worry you. Don't apologize, I said. That's what mothers are for. I just don't understand, she said, shaking her head. I worked so hard. I put in the hours. I stayed late. I did everything they asked and more. And then Mark waltzes in and takes it all away. He didn't even have to try. Tell me about Mark, I said, my voice gentle. I don't think I've ever heard you talk about him. She made a face, wrinkling her nose. He's the golden boy. He came from a different department a year ago and just swept everyone off their feet. He's smooth, charming, but he's as shallow as a puddle. He's always with the senior managers, playing golf, going to fancy dinners. He's a networker, not a worker. He doesn't know the first thing about the project he's supposed to be leading. And the managers didn't see that. Claire laughed, a hollow sound. They saw what they wanted to see. They saw a young, ambitious man who was going places. They saw someone who was leadership material. And me, I'm just the quiet one who does the work. I'm not flashy enough, I guess. She sighed, stirring her tea with a spoon. But Dad always told me hard work pays off. I guess he was wrong about that. Her words hit me like a slap. I thought of Robert, sitting in his study in the middle of the night, shuffling papers and hiding his phone. I thought of the photograph, the letterhead, the secrecy. A cold knot of suspicion tightened in my stomach. Claire, I said carefully, did Mark ever mention where he was getting his information, any inside sources? She frowned, thinking. He's a name dropper. He's always talking about people he knows, industry experts, consultants. He said he had someone giving him a competitive edge. I thought it was just his ego talking. What kind of competitive edge, I don't know. He mentioned something about supply chain logistics a few weeks ago. He said he had a big industry expert who was helping him with the client pitch. He said the guy was a real shark. A shark. The word was a cold, sharp thing in my mind. That was how Robert described his job sometimes. It was a competitive world, he'd say. You had to be a shark to survive. You had to be willing to take risks, to push boundaries. I looked at my daughter, her face a mask of defeat, and a terrible suspicion began to crystallize. I couldn't speak it out loud. It was too monstrous. But it was there, growing in my mind like a poisonous weed. Claire, I said, reaching across the table to take her hand, I want you to think very carefully. Did Mark ever mention a specific company? A name? She shook her head. He just said it was a logistics consultant. I didn't pay much attention. I thought he was bragging. I squeezed her hand. It's okay, honey. Don't worry about it. You're acting strange, Mom, she said, her eyes searching my face. Is something wrong? No, I said, forcing a smile. I'm just worried about you. That's all. The truth was, I was terrified. I was terrified of what I was beginning to suspect. I was terrified of what it would mean for my marriage, for my family, for everything I had believed in for 30 years. But I couldn't tell Claire. Not yet. Not without proof. Let me make us some lunch, I said, standing up abruptly. You need to eat something. I busied myself in her kitchen, opening cabinets and pulling out pots and pans. But my mind was elsewhere. I was thinking about Robert. I was thinking about the money. I was thinking about the phone calls, the late nights, the secrets. Why would he do it? What could possibly be worth betraying his own daughter? And then, the answer came to me. It wasn't about helping Mark. It was about money. Robert had been stressed about money for months. He managed our accounts, and he'd been evasive when I asked about the savings. I had assumed it was just the normal worries of a man nearing retirement. But now I wondered. What if it was more than that? What if he had gotten himself into trouble? What if he had seen Mark as a way out? Mark was a name-dropper who bought his way into meetings. Robert was a man who had sold his own daughter's future for a paycheck. The pieces were finally falling into place, and the picture they formed was ugly. I felt dizzy. I leaned against the kitchen counter, gripping the edge with both hands. I heard Claire walk into the kitchen, and I felt her hand on my shoulder. Mom, are you okay? You're white as a ghost. I turned to look at her, and I saw the worry in her eyes. She was already so hurt, so fragile. I couldn't add to her burden. Not yet. I'm fine, I lied, forcing a smile. I just didn't sleep well last night. It's nothing. She insisted on driving me home. I didn't argue. I didn't think I could make the drive myself. On the way, I stared out the window, watching the familiar streets pass by. Everything looked the same, but it wasn't. The world had tilted on its axis. When I got home, Robert was in the living room, pretending to read the newspaper. He stood up as I walked in. How is she? He asked, the picture of concerned fatherhood. I looked at him, this man I had loved, this man I had trusted with my whole life. He was a stranger. She's fine, I said, my voice hollow. She's hurt, but she'll be fine. I walked past him and into the kitchen. My hands were shaking as I opened the drawer where Robert kept his work files. I knew he had a second phone, a cheap one he used for emergencies. I found it in the bottom of the drawer, hidden under a pile of old receipts. It was on. I scrolled through the messages. The contact was saved as MH. I pressed the message icon, and the screen filled with a string of texts. Dates, times, cryptic references to the project, the numbers, the quarterly estimates. It was all there. Asterisk, the review is next Friday. Need the final numbers by Wednesday. They're sending the revised specs today. Will forward as soon as I get them. The quarterly estimates are ready for your meeting. Marked as high priority. Asterisk, the messages made no sense on their own. But put together, they painted a clear picture. Robert was feeding information to someone. He was passing along confidential data. He was the pipeline. The final message was from last night, right after he'd looked at his phone at dinner. It was a single line. Asterisk, she knows something is off. Asterisk. I put the phone back, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure he could hear it from the other room. I was dizzy, sick to my stomach. I had to confront him. I had to know why. But I couldn't do it here in the kitchen, with the dishes still in the sink and the ghost of our ordinary life hanging over everything. I walked back to the living room. He was sitting in his armchair, still pretending to read the newspaper. I stood in front of him, blocking the light from the window. Robert, I said, my voice low and steady. "We need to talk about the package." He looked up, startled. "What package?" "The one that came yesterday," I said. "The one you took into your study. The one with my daughter's company name on the letterhead." His face went pale. The newspaper crumpled in his hands. "Sarah, don't lie to me," I said, my voice rising. "I saw the texts on your other phone. I know what you did. You sabotaged our daughter. Your own daughter." He opened his mouth to speak, but I cut him off. "So help me, Robert," I said, my voice trembling with anger. "If you don't tell me the truth right now, I will walk out that door and never come back." The silence in the room was absolute. The only sound was the ticking of the grandfather clock, a constant, mocking rhythm of time passing. Time I had spent building a life with a man who had betrayed me, betrayed our family, betrayed everything we had stood for. I stared at him, waiting, the warmth of my love for him turning to stone. Robert stared at me, his face a battlefield of emotions. Shock, shame, fear. For a long moment, he didn't speak. He just sat there, the crumpled newspaper still in his hands, looking like a man who had just been told his whole life was a lie. And in a way, I suppose it was. "Please, Sarah," he finally whispered. "Just sit down. Let me explain." I didn't sit. I stood my ground, arms crossed, my eyes boring into him. "I'm not sitting down. I've been sitting down for 30 years. Now you're going to stand up and tell me the truth, or I'm walking out that door." He let out a long, shaky breath. His shoulders sagged, and he seemed to collapse into himself, aging 10 years in a single moment. He dropped the newspaper onto the coffee table and put his head in his hands. "It's not what you think," he said, but his voice was hollow. He didn't even believe the words himself. "Then tell me what it is," I said, my voice a cold blade. "Explain to me how my husband, the father of my children, could destroy our daughter's career for money." "It wasn't for money," he said, looking up at me with desperate eyes. "I mean, it was, but not like that. I didn't mean to hurt her. I thought I was doing what was best for us." "Best for us," I laughed, a bitter, hollow sound. "You sold her future for a few extra dollars. For a bigger retirement fund. What kind of father does that?" "It wasn't a few dollars, Sarah." His voice cracked. "I lost a lot of money. A lot. I thought I could fix it. I thought I could make it up before anyone got hurt. I was wrong. I was so wrong." I felt my knees go weak. I didn't sit down, but I leaned against the back of the armchair, gripping the fabric to steady myself. "What are you talking about?" he told me then. It all came pouring out in a broken torrent. It started a year ago with a man named Jerry. An old college friend, someone Robert hadn't seen in decades. Jerry had reached out, rekindled their friendship, and then presented Robert with a once-in-a-lifetime investment opportunity. Real estate in Florida. Condos on the beach. A guaranteed return that was too good to pass up. "I was skeptical at first," Robert said, his voice low and ashamed. But Jerry was persuasive. He had charts, projections, a whole presentation. He showed me the names of other investors, people I respected. He said it was a sure thing. "It wasn't a sure thing," I said, the words flat. "No," he said, shaking his head. "It was a fraud. Jerry was a fraud. He disappeared with all the money. I lost $70,000. The number hit me like a physical blow. $70,000. Years of our savings. Years of scrimping and saving, of staying home instead of traveling, of buying store-brand groceries instead of name-brand. It was all gone. I felt the air leave my lungs. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "We could have figured something out. We could have cut back, taken out a loan. We could have done something." "I was ashamed," he said, his voice cracking. "I felt so stupid. I'm supposed to protect us. I'm the man of the house. I provide. That's what I do. And I had let us down. I thought I could fix it on my own, without you having to worry. So you fixed it by becoming a corporate spy." I spat. He flinched like I had struck him. "It wasn't like that. I knew Mark Holloway was up for the promotion. Claire mentioned him at dinner. She was so competitive with him. And I knew he was looking for an edge. He'd been networking with senior management, trying to get inside information on the company's expansion strategy." "How did you know that?" "Because he reached out to me," Robert said. He'd heard through a mutual acquaintance that I was a man who knew the industry. He offered me a deal. Inside information on a client's supply chain in exchange for a consulting fee. And you said yes. He shook his head. No. I said no. I told him I wasn't interested. But then the money was gone. The bank was calling. I was drowning, Sarah. I couldn't see any other way out. So you sold your daughter's future for $40,000. I didn't think of it like that, he said, his voice desperate. It was just a few pieces of data. General strategic stuff. Nothing illegal, really. Just the kind of intelligence you can't find in a public report. He used it to impress the client, to secure the biggest contract. It made him look like a visionary. And it made you $40,000 richer, I said, the number hanging in the air like a curse. He started crying then. Ugly, broken sobs that shook his whole body. It was just a job, Sarah. She's young. She'll bounce back. But what was I supposed to do? We couldn't pay for the new roof. We couldn't afford to retire. I was drowning. The roof. He was right about the roof. It had been leaking for months, and we'd been putting off the repair because it was too expensive. And the retirement he mentioned was real. We were looking at a future of nothing but Social Security, a future that was suddenly much closer than it had ever been. But his logic was twisted. He had protected us by betraying us. He had betrayed our daughter to save our roof. It was a grotesque trade-off, and I couldn't wrap my mind around it. She will not bounce back from this, I said, my voice cold and final. You have broken her trust. You have broken my trust. You have broken this family. Robert couldn't argue. He just sat there, a defeated old man, his face wet with tears. He looked small, diminished. The man I had married, the man I had loved, was gone. In his place was a stranger I didn't recognize. What are you going to do? He asked, his voice barely a whisper. I didn't answer. I couldn't think. My mind was a blank wall of shock. I turned and walked to the window, looking out at the quiet street. The neighbors were out walking their dogs. A car drove by, its radio playing music I couldn't hear. The world was going on as if nothing had happened. But everything had happened. Everything was different. I need to think, I said. I can't look at you right now. I walked out of the living room and went up to the bedroom. I closed the door and leaned against it, my heart pounding. The room was the same as it had always been. The same dresser, the same nightstand, the same framed photograph of our wedding day on the wall. I looked at it now, at the young couple smiling for the camera, and I felt a pang of grief so sharp it took my breath away. That couple was gone. They had been replaced by strangers. I lay down on the bed, staring at the ceiling. There was a crack in the plaster, a long thin line running from one corner of the room to the other. I had noticed it years ago, and I had always meant to fix it. But I never had. And now it seemed like a perfect metaphor for my marriage. We had lived with that crack for so long, ignoring it, pretending it wasn't there, until it had split everything apart. My phone buzzed. I picked it up and saw Claire's name on the screen. My heart lurched. I couldn't answer. I couldn't tell her the truth. Not yet. But I couldn't lie to her either. I let it go to voicemail. A minute later, it buzzed again. A text message this time. Mom, I just found out something. Call me. It's important. I stared at the message, my hands trembling. I typed back, what is it? The response came almost immediately. I was talking to a friend in HR. She told me Mark's inside information came from a consultant. She said the consultant was from a firm called Caldwell Logistics. That's Dad's company, Mom. I felt the floor drop out from under me. She knew. Or at least, she knew enough. The secret was out, and I hadn't been the one to tell her. My phone rang again. Claire. I answered, my voice shaky. Claire, honey, Mom, is it true? She asked, her voice frantic. Did Dad do this? Did he help Mark? I couldn't lie. I couldn't protect him anymore. Yes, I said, the word a croak. He did. The line went silent. Then I heard a sound I had never heard before, a sound that would haunt me for the rest of my life. It was the sound of my daughter's heart breaking. Oh my God, she whispered. Oh my God. Claire, listen to me, but she was already gone. The line was dead. I called her back immediately, but she didn't answer. I called again, and this time it went straight to voicemail. She had turned off her phone. I sat up, my heart racing. I couldn't let her be alone. Not with this. I had to find her. I grabbed my keys and ran down the stairs. Robert was still in the living room, sitting where I'd left him. He looked up as I flew past him. Sarah, wait, he called out. Where are you going? But I was already out the door. I drove to Claire's apartment, my mind a blur of fear and fury. I barely saw the road. My daughter was out there alone, reeling from the worst betrayal a child could imagine. And it was all my husband's fault. I couldn't think about that now. I couldn't think about him at all. I had to focus on Claire. When I got to her building, I ran up the stairs. I knocked on her door, calling her name. Claire. It's me. Please, let me in. Silence. I pressed my ear to the door. I could hear the faint sound of crying, a choked sob that was barely audible through the wood. Claire, please, I begged. I'm here. We need to talk. I heard the shuffle of footsteps, the click of the lock. The door cracked open. Her face appeared in the gap. It was pale, tear-streaked, and hard. The look in her eyes was one I had never seen before, a cold, distant fury that made her look like a stranger. Is it true? She asked, her voice a raw whisper. Did he do it? I couldn't lie to her. Yes, I said, my voice breaking. It's true. She opened the door just wide enough for me to step inside. The apartment was dark, the curtains drawn. She walked away from me and sat on the sofa, hugging a pillow to her chest. I sat down in the chair opposite her. The distance between us felt like a canyon. I looked it up, she said, her voice flat. Caldwell Logistics. It's his company. And I found a string of emails in my work account from a month ago. An anonymous tip about the client's logistics strategy. I thought it was from a competitor. I ignored it. I thought it was just a trick. She laughed, a short, bitter sound. I was so naive. It was from my own father. He didn't mean to hurt you, I said, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. He made a terrible mistake. He lost money, a lot of it, and he was desperate. Desperate, she cried, her voice rising. He traded my career for $40,000. That's nothing, Mom. That's a year of my salary. My career is over. Everyone is talking about it. They think I'm a joke. Mark is a hero, and I'm the failure who couldn't even keep her own father from stabbing her in the back. The pain in her voice was unbearable. I reached out to touch her, but she flinched away. I'm so sorry, baby, I whispered. I am so sorry. Sorry doesn't fix it, she said. It doesn't give me my job back. It doesn't erase the humiliation. I had to resign this morning. HR said I was a liability. They thought I was involved. I couldn't even defend myself, because how do you defend yourself against your own father? My heart shattered into a million pieces. She had lost her job. Her career, the one she had worked so hard for, was in ruins. And it was Robert's fault. He had taken everything from her. I'm going to divorce him, I said, the words coming out before I could stop them. They were decisive, final. Saying them aloud made them real. Claire looked at me, her eyes searching mine. You'd do that, she asked, her voice softening. For me, for us, I said. He broke us. I can't fix it. I don't want to. She began to cry then, a great, heaving sob that came from somewhere deep inside her. I went to her and held her, and we cried together. The crying was cleansing, washing away the shock and the numbness, leaving only a raw, pulsing grief. We stayed that way for a long time, holding each other, the two of us a small, broken unit against the world. I stayed with Claire that night. I didn't leave her alone. We sat on her small sofa, wrapped in the same old blanket she'd had since college, and we talked until our voices gave out. She asked me questions I couldn't answer. Why would he do this? How long had he been planning it? Did he ever really love us? I told her the truth as far as I knew it. I told her about the lost money, the desperation, the terrible choice he had made. But I couldn't tell her why. I didn't know why myself. She fell asleep eventually, her head on my shoulder, her breathing shallow and uneven. I stayed awake, staring at the wall, my mind churning. The divorce was not a threat. It was a promise. I had made it to myself the moment I saw the look in her eyes. The look of a daughter who had been betrayed by her father. That look had killed something in me. In the morning, I made breakfast. Toast and eggs, the same thing I'd made for her when she was a little girl. She picked at it, not really eating. She was wearing the same sweatshirt as the day before, her hair a tangled mess. She looked hollowed out, like someone had scooped out the inside of her and left nothing but a shell dot. "What are you going to do, Mom?" she asked, her voice small. "About the house, about money. I'm going to see a lawyer," I said, keeping my voice steady. "And I don't know about money. I have a little put aside, but it's not much. It's not what we had." The we hung in the air between us. There was no we anymore. Just me and Claire. A mother and daughter trying to figure out how to survive. "I can help," she said, but the offer was hollow. She had just lost her income. She was as adrift as I was. "We'll figure it out," I said, my voice more confident than I felt. One thing at a time. I drove to the bank that afternoon. I had a joint account with Robert, and I wanted to transfer my share into a new account. I stood in line, clutching my identification, rehearsing what I was going to say. But when the teller pulled up the balance, I felt my heart stop. "Mrs. Caldwell," the teller said, a young woman with kind eyes, "there's only about $1,500 in this account. The balance was significantly higher last year. Are you sure this is the right account?" I stared at the screen. "What happened to the money?" The teller looked uncomfortable. "There have been several large withdrawals over the past 6 months. They're all flagged as consulting fees paid to a limited company called MH Holdings." "Are you familiar with that company?" I felt the room tilt. MH Holdings. Mark Holloway. The $40,000 was gone. Robert hadn't even kept it. He had spent it on mortgage payments and credit card debt. He had fixed the roof, just like he said. The money that had cost Claire her career had been spent on the mundane necessities of our life. "What about the mortgage?" I asked, my voice hollow. "Is it current?" The teller checked her computer. "It appears to be 2 months in arrears, ma'am. The bank has sent several notices. 2 months in arrears." He had been hiding that from me too. I walked out of the bank in a daze. I stood on the sidewalk, watching the cars go by, and I felt like I was floating. Nothing felt real. I drove back to the house. Robert was there, sitting at the kitchen table. He stood up as I walked in, his face a mask of anxiety. "Sarah, I've been trying to call you." "Don't," I said, holding up my hand. "I went to the bank. I know about the money. I know about the mortgage. I know everything." He opened his mouth to speak, but I cut him off. "The roof is fixed," I said, my voice bitter. "That's what you traded our daughter for. A roof. Congratulations. You saved the house. Too bad you destroyed the family." He sank back into his chair, his face crumbling. "I know," he said, his voice cracking. "I know what I did. I think about it every minute. I can't sleep. I can't eat. I can't look at myself in the mirror." "Good," I said. "You shouldn't be able to." I walked past him and went upstairs. I packed a bag. Clothes, toiletries, a few photographs from the mantelpiece. I didn't take anything else. I didn't want anything else. "Where are you going?" Robert called from the bottom of the stairs. "I'm staying with Claire," I said. "And I'm not coming back." I walked out the door and didn't look back. Living with Claire was hard. Not because of her, but because of the silence. The apartment was small, and the silence seemed to fill every corner. She retreated into her room a lot, taking calls from friends, but speaking in short, clipped sentences. She was embarrassed. The humiliation was a poison that had seeped into her bones. I tried to make myself useful. I cooked simple meals, cleaned the bathroom, went to the grocery store. I did everything I could to be a support, not a burden. But in the quiet moments, when we sat at her small kitchen table eating dinner, the silence was heavy. It was a silence filled with unspoken questions, with a shared grief that neither of us knew how to articulate. "Mom," she said one evening, pushing a piece of broccoli around her plate, "what are we going to do? I can't live on unemployment forever." "And you can't stay here forever." "I know," I said. "I'll find a job. I can work. I'm not that old." "You're 60 years old, Mom," she said gently. "What kind of job are you going to find?" She was right. I hadn't worked in decades. My resume was a relic from another era. But I couldn't think about that now. I had to take things one step at a time. I'll figure it out, I said, the same words I had used before. I was starting to hate those words. They were a lie I told myself when I didn't have any other answers. A few days later, a letter came. It was addressed to Claire from a law firm. She opened it with trembling hands, and I watched her face go pale as she read it. What is it? I asked. It's a cease and desist letter, she said, her voice shaking. Mark's lawyers are threatening to sue me for defamation. They're saying I've been spreading malicious lies about him. But you haven't said anything, I said. You haven't told anyone. I know, she said. He's just trying to scare me. To keep me quiet. He knows I have a case. He's trying to shut me up before I can do anything about it. I took the letter and read it myself. It was full of legal jargon, but the message was clear. Mark Holloway was a bully. He had stolen Claire's promotion, and now he was trying to destroy her completely. What are you going to do? I asked. I don't know, she said, her voice barely a whisper. I can't afford a lawyer. I can't afford to fight this. I have nothing left, Mom. I looked at my daughter, so young and so broken. And in that moment, something shifted inside me. The fear was still there, the grief, the anger. But beneath it all, something new was beginning to form. A resolve. A determination. I had spent my whole life being a wife, a mother, a homemaker. I had defined myself by my roles. But those roles were gone now. My husband had betrayed me. My home was no longer mine. My daughter was lost, and there was no one else to save her. I had to do it myself. This isn't over, I said, my voice firm. He's not going to get away with this. Not if I have anything to say about it. Claire looked at me, surprise flickering in her eyes. Mom, you can't fight him. He has money. He has lawyers. We have nothing. I have 30 years of experience, I said. I know people. I know things. And I have nothing left to lose. The next day, I started making calls. I didn't have a plan. I didn't have a strategy. I just knew that I had to do something. I started with Robert's old colleagues, people I had met at company picnics and holiday parties over the years. I didn't tell them about the betrayal. I just asked questions, casual, innocent questions. I asked about the logistics industry. I asked about consulting fees. I asked about the kind of inside information that could give a young executive an edge. Most of them were happy to talk. They were older, retired, happy to have someone to listen to their stories. One of them, a man named Mr. Henderson, told me a long, rambling story about a scandal at a rival firm. A senior manager had been fired for selling client lists. He didn't mention names, but he described the kind of behavior that Robert had engaged in. Another woman, Patricia, a former secretary, told me about her time at Robert's firm. She was a gossip, and she had a long memory. She told me about the young consultants who had come and gone, the ones who were willing to bend the rules to get ahead. She mentioned Mark Holloway by name. Young man, very charming, she said. He had a way of getting what he wanted. I always thought he was a bit too smooth, if you know what I mean. Did he ever work with Robert? I asked, keeping my voice casual. She paused. Now that you mention it, I do remember something. Robert had a private meeting with him a few months ago. I don't know what it was about, but I remember thinking it was strange. They didn't move in the same circles. I thanked her and hung up. The pieces were starting to come together. Robert had sold Claire out. He had given Mark the information he needed to steal her promotion. And now Mark was trying to destroy her completely. I made more calls. I gathered more information. I kept a journal, writing down every detail, every name, every date. I was building a case. I didn't know what I was going to do with it, but I knew I couldn't let it go. A week after I left Robert, I received a letter from our family lawyer. Robert had filed for divorce. He was trying to protect his assets, I suppose. It was a bitter irony. He was still trying to protect himself, even now, even after everything he had done. I called him. He answered on the first ring. Sarah, he said, his voice desperate. Thank you for calling. I've been trying to reach you. Save it, I said. I got the letter. You're filing for divorce. It's not what you think, he said. I'm not trying to hurt you. I just thought you'd protect yourself, I said. That's all you do, isn't it? Protect yourself. That's what you were doing when you betrayed Claire. You were protecting your own skin. Sarah, please, he said. I know I made a terrible mistake. I know I hurt you. But I love you. I love Claire. I would do anything to make this right. Then do something, I said. Stop hiding. Stop protecting yourself. Tell the truth. Sign an affidavit. Tell the world what you did. They'll sue me, he said, his voice panicked. They'll destroy me. You already destroyed us, I said. Now you have a choice. You can keep protecting yourself, or you can finally do the right thing. I hung up before he could answer. Robert didn't call back. I didn't expect him to. He had never been the kind of man to face his problems head-on. He preferred to let things fester, to hope they would go away on their own. That was how we had ended up here. He had let his shame fester until it had poisoned everything. The days at Claire's apartment blurred together. I woke up each morning with a knot in my stomach, the same knot I'd had since the night of the package. I made breakfast, cleaned the kitchen, ran errands. Claire stayed in her room a lot, job hunting on her laptop, sending out resumes that rarely got responses. The market was tough, she said. Too many qualified candidates for too few openings. I knew that was only part of the truth. The other part was that her reputation had been tarnished. People in her industry talked. They knew she had been passed over for promotion, that she had resigned under a cloud of suspicion. They didn't know the details, but they didn't need to. The damage was done. One afternoon, I went to the mailbox for Claire while she was on a phone interview. The little metal box was crammed with flyers and bills. I sorted through them as I walked back up the stairs. Junk mail, a credit card offer, a notice from the electric company. And then, tucked at the bottom, a thick envelope with a lawyer's return address. I set it on the kitchen table and waited for Claire to finish her call. She came out of her room looking exhausted, her hair pulled back in a messy bun. Anything good? She asked, gesturing at the pile of mail. I don't know, I said. There's something from a law firm. She picked up the envelope and opened it with trembling hands. I watched her face as she read it. At first, there was confusion, then disbelief, then a flicker of something I hadn't seen in weeks. Hope. Mom, she said, her voice barely a whisper. It's from a lawyer. He says he's willing to represent me. Pro bono. He says he's been following my case. I took the letter from her and read it myself. It was from a small firm, a solo practitioner named David Chin. He wrote that he had heard about Claire's situation through a colleague and believed she had a strong case for wrongful termination and defamation. He offered to take her case for free, provided she was willing to pursue it. I don't understand, Claire said. Why would he do this? I don't have any money. I can't pay him. Maybe he believes in you, I said. Maybe he knows what Mark did was wrong, and he wants to help. She shook her head, still not believing it. People don't just do things like that, Mom. There has to be a catch. I didn't have an answer for her. But I had a feeling. A feeling that someone was looking out for us. And I had a suspicion about who it might be. That evening, I called Robert. He answered on the first ring, his voice hesitant. Sarah. Robert, I said, did you hire a lawyer for Claire? There was a long pause. Then a sigh. I did what I could, he said. I know a few people. I made some calls. I asked around. I found someone who was willing to help. Why? I asked. After everything you did, why would you do this? Because I love her, he said, his voice cracking. I know I have no right to say that. I know I destroyed her life. But I love her, Sarah. And I can't fix what I broke. But I can try to help her fix it herself. I was quiet for a long moment. I didn't know what to say. I was still angry, still hurt. But underneath the anger, there was something else. Something that felt a lot like respect. Thank you, I finally said. That was a good thing you did. It doesn't make up for anything, he said. I know that. But it was something I could do. I had to do something. Robert, I said, I'm not ready to forgive you. I don't know if I ever will be. But I'm glad you did this. I understand, he said. I don't deserve your forgiveness. I just want you to know that I'm trying. I'm trying to be better. I hung up and sat in the dark kitchen, staring out the window at the city lights. I thought about the man I had married, the man who had held my hand when our children were born, the man who had promised to love and cherish me until death did us part. That man was gone. But maybe, just maybe, he was starting to come back. The next few weeks were a blur of activity. Claire met with David Chin, the lawyer. He was a young man, sharp and determined, with a fire in his eyes that matched Claire's own. He took her case and began building a strategy. The cease and desist letter from Mark's lawyers was a threat, but it was also an opportunity. It showed that Mark was worried. It showed that he knew Claire had a case. His lawyers are trying to scare you, David said. But that's because they know we have a strong case. We have evidence. We have the emails. We have the timeline. And if we can get your father to testify, we can prove everything. Claire looked at me. I nodded. I'll talk to him, I said. But I didn't have to. Robert called me the next day, his voice steady for the first time in weeks. I'll do it, he said. I'll sign an affidavit. I'll tell them everything. I'll tell them what I did and how I did it. Robert, I said, surprised, are you sure they'll destroy you? You'll lose your job. You might even face criminal charges. I know, he said. But I deserve it. And Claire deserves to have her life back. I can't give her back what I took, but I can give her this. I can give her the truth. I was silent for a long moment. Then I said, I'll come over. We'll talk about it. I went to the house that afternoon. It felt strange, walking through the front door, seeing all the familiar things. The photographs on the wall, the old armchair where Robert sat to read the newspaper, the kitchen where I had spent so many hours cooking meals and making memories. It was the same house, but it felt like a museum. A monument to a life that no longer existed. Robert was waiting for me in the living room. He looked older, thinner. His hair had gone gray in the weeks since I'd left. He stood up when I walked in, his hands clasped in front of him. Thank you for coming, he said. I didn't come for you, I said. I came for Claire. I know, he said. That's why I'm doing this. We sat down, and he told me everything. The whole story from the beginning. The lost money, the desperation, the meetings with Mark, the secret phone, the late-night calls. He told me how he had justified it to himself at the time, how he had convinced himself that it was just business, that Claire would never find out, that he would make it up to her somehow. I was a fool, he said, his voice thick with emotion. I was so focused on fixing one problem that I created a much bigger one. I hurt Claire in a way I can never undo. And I hurt you. I hurt you the most. Robert, I said, I'm still angry. I'm still hurt. I don't know if I can ever forgive you. But I'm glad you're doing this. It's the right thing. I know, he said. It's the only thing I can do. He signed the affidavit that day. He wrote down everything, every detail, every date, every piece of information he had passed to Mark. He didn't leave anything out. When he was finished, he handed me the document and said, I'm ready for whatever comes next. I took the affidavit to Claire. She read it in silence, her face unreadable. When she finished, she looked up at me with tears in her eyes. Mom, she said, he did it. He actually did it. He did, I said. He's trying to make it right. It doesn't make it right, she said. It doesn't undo what he did. But it's a start. With the affidavit in hand, David Chin was able to build a powerful case. He filed a counterclaim against Mark and the company, alleging wrongful termination and defamation. The legal battle was fierce, but Claire had the truth on her side. And the truth, it turned out, was more powerful than money and connections. Mark's lawyers tried to bury the case, to drag it out in the hopes that Claire would give up. But Claire didn't give up. She was determined, more determined than I had ever seen her. She spent hours with David, going over documents, preparing for depositions. She was fighting for her career, her reputation, her life. I watched her with a mixture of pride and sorrow. She was so strong, so resilient. She had been knocked down, but she was getting back up. And she was doing it on her own terms. As the case progressed, I found myself thinking more and more about my own future. I was living in Claire's apartment, sleeping on her sofa, living out of a suitcase. It wasn't a permanent solution. I needed to find a job, to make a life for myself. But I didn't know where to start. One evening, after a particularly long day of legal meetings, Claire came home and found me sitting at the kitchen table, staring at a blank piece of paper. Mom, she said, what are you doing? I'm trying to figure out what to do, I said. I need to find a job. I need to find a place to live. I can't stay here forever. She sat down across from me and took my hand. Mom, you don't have to figure it all out at once. We're in this together. We'll figure it out together. I looked at her, my daughter, my brave, beautiful daughter, and I felt a wave of love so strong it almost knocked me over. She had been through so much, but she was still here, still fighting, still loving. I know, I said. I just feel so lost. I spent my whole life being a wife and a mother. I don't know how to be anything else. Then we'll figure it out, she said. One step at a time. The next day, I started looking for work. I called old friends, asked for leads, sent out resumes to places that probably wouldn't hire me. It was humbling and it was exhausting. But I kept going because I had no other choice. One afternoon, I got a call from a woman I hadn't spoken to in years. An old friend from my pre-marriage days, a woman named Susan. She had heard through the grapevine that I was looking for work. I have an opening at my shop, she said. It's not glamorous. It's just retail, selling home goods. But it's a job, and it comes with a small salary. Are you interested? I said yes without hesitating. It wasn't much, but it was a start. A way to stand on my own 2 feet, to prove to myself that I could survive on my own. I started working at Susan's shop the following week. The work was simple, and the customers were mostly friendly. It wasn't the life I had imagined for myself, but it was mine. It was a life I was building, one small step at a time. The shop was small, tucked between a bakery and a dry cleaner on a street that had seen better days. Susan had owned it for 15 years, selling decorative pillows and scented candles and the kind of knickknacks that people bought on a whim. It was a modest business, but it was hers, and she had made it work. I admired that about her. She had never married, never had children. She had built her life on her own terms, and she seemed content with it. I started at the bottom. I stocked shelves, rang up customers, dusted the displays. It was simple work, the kind of work I had done in my 20s before I got married. It felt strange to be doing it again at 60, but it also felt liberating. I was earning my own money, even if it wasn't much. I was contributing, not just to Claire's household, but to my own future. The days were long, but they passed quickly. I came home each evening tired but satisfied. Claire was usually at the kitchen table, working on her case with David, or she was on the phone, networking, trying to find a new job. She had been offered a few interviews, but nothing had materialized yet. The stain on her reputation was still fresh, and employers were wary. One evening, I came home to find her sitting at the table, a letter in her hands. Her face was pale, but there was a light in her eyes I hadn't seen in months. Mom, she said, I got a job offer. A real one. I dropped my bag and rushed to her. Where? Tell me everything. It's a smaller firm, she said, her voice trembling with excitement. They're a startup, really, but they do good work. They heard about my case, and they said they admired my courage. They want me to lead their logistics division. Claire, that's wonderful, I said, hugging her. That's absolutely wonderful. I know, she said, laughing, a sound I hadn't heard in so long it made my heart ache. It's not as big as my old company, and the pay is less. But it's a fresh start. A new beginning. That's all I ever wanted. She was crying now, happy tears streaming down her face. I held her and I cried too. It felt like a victory, a small one, but a victory nonetheless. The next day, I went to the bank to deposit my paycheck. It was a small amount, barely enough to cover my expenses, but it was mine. I had earned it, and that made all the difference. As I stood in line, I found myself thinking about Robert. I hadn't spoken to him in weeks, not since he had signed the affidavit. I had heard through the grapevine that he had lost his job. The company had let him go, citing a breach of ethics. He was on his own now, just like me. I didn't know how I felt about that. Part of me was glad. He deserved to face the consequences of his actions. But another part of me, the part that had loved him for 30 years, felt a pang of pity. He was a broken man, a man who had lost everything. His job, his reputation, his family. He had nothing left. That evening, I called him. He answered on the first ring, his voice hesitant. Sarah, Robert, I said, I heard about your job. I'm sorry. Don't be, he said. I deserve it. I knew what I was doing, and I knew there would be consequences. Are you okay? I asked. Do you need anything? He laughed, a sad, hollow sound. I'm fine. I have a little money saved. And I'm looking for work. It's not easy at my age, but I'll figure it out. I was quiet for a moment. Then I said, Robert, I don't know if I can forgive you. I don't know if I can ever trust you again. But I don't want to see you suffer. You're still the father of my children. You're still the man I married. Thank you, Sarah, he said, his voice thick with emotion. That means more than you know. We talked for a little while longer about Claire's new job, about the case, about the future. It was strange, talking to him like this. There was a distance between us that hadn't been there before, but there was also a new kind of understanding. We had both been through something terrible, and we were both trying to find our way out. The days turned into weeks, and the weeks turned into months. Claire's case was finally settled. Mark was forced to resign from the company, and Claire received a settlement that gave her a measure of financial security. It wasn't enough to make her rich, but it was enough to pay off her debts and give her a fresh start. I continued working at the shop, and I started saving money. It wasn't much, but it was a start. I had opened my own bank account, and I was slowly building a nest egg. It felt good to be independent, to know that I could survive on my own. One day, Susan pulled me aside. Sarah, she said, I've been thinking. I'm getting older, and I can't run this shop forever. I've been looking for someone to take over, someone I can trust. Would you be interested? I stared at her, stunned. Me, Susan, I don't have any money. I couldn't afford to buy a business. I'm not asking you to buy it, she said. I'm asking you to run it. I'll still own it, but you'll manage it. You'll make the decisions, hire the staff, choose the inventory. I'll pay you a salary, and if things go well, we can talk about you buying me out someday. I didn't know what to say. It was the opportunity of a lifetime, the chance to build something of my own, to create a future for myself. But it was also terrifying. I had never managed a business before. I had never been in charge of anything more than a household. I don't know if I can do it, I said. I don't know if I'm qualified. Sarah, Susan said, you've been running this shop for months. You know the customers. You know the inventory. You know the business. You're more qualified than anyone else I know. I thought about it. I thought about Claire, about how she had taken a risk and come out stronger. I thought about Robert, about how he had made a terrible mistake and was trying to make amends. I thought about myself, about how I had spent my whole life being someone's wife, someone's mother. This was my chance to be someone else. To be Sarah. I'll do it, I said. I'll do it. Susan smiled and shook my hand. Congratulations, she said. You're the new manager of the shop. I told Claire that night. She was thrilled. Mom, that's amazing, she said, hugging me. I'm so proud of you. I'm proud of me too, I said, laughing. I can't believe I did it. Of course you did, she said. You're strong. You always have been. You just forgot it for a while. I started my new role the next week. It was challenging, but I loved it. I loved making decisions, solving problems, building something of my own. I was good at it, and it gave me a sense of purpose I had never felt before. A few months later, I ran into Patricia, the former secretary from Robert's firm. She was shopping in the shop, and she recognized me immediately. Sarah, she said, her face lighting up. It's so good to see you. I heard about what happened. I'm so sorry. It's okay, I said. Things are better now. I'm doing well. I heard Robert lost his job, she said, her voice lowering. He's been working as a consultant, I think. Nothing fancy, just small jobs here and there. That's good, I said. I'm glad he's finding work. He's been telling people he's trying to make amends, Patricia said. He's been volunteering at a local food bank, helping people who are less fortunate. I think he's trying to find some meaning in his life. I nodded, not sure what to say. I hadn't spoken to Robert in months, not since that phone call. I had been so focused on building my own life that I had pushed him to the back of my mind. But hearing about him now, I felt something shift inside me. A small crack in the wall I had built around my heart. That evening, I called him. He answered, his voice warm. Sarah, is that you? It's me, I said. I heard about the volunteering. I just wanted to say that I think it's a good thing you're doing. Thank you, he said. It's not much, but it helps. It helps me feel like I'm not completely useless. You're not useless, I said. You made a mistake. A terrible one. But you're trying to make it right. That counts for something. Sarah, he said, I know I don't have any right to ask, but I was wondering. Would you like to have dinner sometime? Just to talk. Not as a couple, but as, I don't know, as friends. I was quiet for a moment. The idea of seeing him again, of sitting across a table from him, made my stomach twist with anxiety. But it also made me feel something else. Hope. I think I'd like that, I said. I think I'd like that a lot. We met at a small restaurant, nothing fancy. It was the kind of place we used to go to when we were first married, before the children, before the mortgage, before everything got so complicated. He was waiting for me when I arrived, standing by the door, looking nervous. You look good, he said, his voice soft. You look tired, I said, but I smiled. We sat down and ordered. The conversation was stilted at first, awkward, like two strangers meeting for the first time. But as the meal went on, we started to relax. We talked about Claire, about her new job, about her future. We talked about my work at the shop, about the plans I had to expand the business. We talked about everything except the thing that had torn us apart. Finally, as we were finishing our coffee, Robert reached across the table and took my hand. Sarah, he said, I know I don't deserve a second chance. I know I hurt you and I hurt Claire. But I want you to know that I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to make it up to you. I'm going to be a better man. A better father. I'm going to earn your trust back, even if it takes forever. I looked at him, this man I had loved for 30 years, this man who had broken my heart. There was a sincerity in his eyes I hadn't seen in a long time. He was different now. Humble. Broken. Trying. I don't know if I can ever trust you again, I said. I don't know if I can ever forgive you. But I'm willing to try. I'm willing to see where this goes. He squeezed my hand, tears welling in his eyes. That's all I ask, he said. That's all I've ever asked. The restaurant had grown quiet. The lunch rush was over and the waiters were wiping down tables. Robert still had his hand on mine, and I didn't pull away. The warmth of his palm against my skin felt strange and familiar at the same time, like coming home after a long absence. I don't know where we go from here, I said, pulling my hand back gently. I'm not ready to just pick up where we left off. That life is gone. That trust is gone. I know, he said. I'm not asking for that. I'm just asking for a chance. A chance to be part of your life again, even if it's just as a friend. I looked at him across the table. The lines around his eyes were deeper than I remembered, and his hair was thinner. He looked tired, worn down by the weight of his mistakes. But there was something in his eyes, a flicker of hope that I hadn't seen in months. A friend, I repeated. I think I can do that. We finished our coffee and walked out of the restaurant together. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the street. We stood on the sidewalk, awkward and unsure. Thank you for coming, he said. I know it wasn't easy. It wasn't, I said. But I'm glad I did. He nodded, and we parted ways. I walked back to my car, and he walked in the opposite direction. I watched him go, his shoulders hunched, his steps slow. He looked like a man carrying a heavy burden. I drove home to Claire's apartment, my mind churning. The dinner had been good. It had been comfortable. But it had also raised more questions than it answered. Was I ready to let him back into my life? Could I ever trust him again? I didn't have the answers, and that troubled me. When I got home, Claire was sitting at the kitchen table, a glass of wine in her hand. She looked up as I walked in, a knowing smile on her face. So, she said, how did it go? It was fine, I said, hanging up my coat. We talked. It was nice. Just nice, she asked, raising an eyebrow. What else would it be? I said, sitting down across from her. We're not getting back together, Claire. I don't know if I'll ever be ready for that. You don't have to be ready for that, she said. But you don't have to shut him out either. He's still my father. He's still your husband. Maybe not the husband you thought he was, but he's trying to be better. I sighed, rubbing my temples. I know. I just don't know how to feel. Part of me is still so angry. And part of me just wants to move on and forget it ever happened. Then move on, she said. But you don't have to forget. You can forgive, even if you don't forget. That's what I'm trying to do. I looked at her, my daughter, so wise and so strong. She had been through so much, and yet she was still standing. She was still fighting. She was still choosing love over bitterness. You're a better person than I am, I said. I'm just learning from you, she said. You taught me how to survive. The next few weeks were busy. My work at the shop was picking up, and I was spending more and more time there. I had hired a part-time assistant, a young woman named Maria who was studying business at the local college. She was bright and eager, and she made my life easier. Claire was thriving at her new job. She had been promoted to a senior position, and she was making a name for herself in the industry. The scandal was behind her now, a distant memory that she rarely talked about. Robert had found a new job as well. It wasn't as prestigious as his old one, but it was honest work, and he seemed content. He had also continued his volunteering at the food bank, and he had started helping out at a local shelter for homeless families. He had found a purpose beyond himself, and it had changed him. We started seeing each other more often. Just dinner, or coffee, or a walk in the park. It was slow, tentative, like two people learning to trust each other again. There were still awkward silences, still moments when the old pain resurfaced. But there were also moments of laughter, moments of connection, moments that reminded me why I had married him in the first place. One evening, we were sitting on a bench in the park, watching the sunset. The sky was a brilliant orange and pink, and the air was cool and crisp. Sarah, he said, his voice soft, I want to ask you something. And I need you to be honest with me. What is it? I asked. I know I hurt you, he said. I know I broke your trust. I know that can't be undone. But I want to know if you think there's a future for us. Not just as friends, but as more. I was quiet for a long moment. I had been asking myself the same question for weeks. I had been wrestling with it, trying to find an answer that felt right. Robert, I said, I don't know if we can go back to the way things were. That life is over. We can't pretend it never happened. I'm not asking you to pretend, he said. I'm asking you to look forward. To see if there's a new life we can build together. A different one. One that's honest and open. I took his hand. It was warm and steady. I need time, I said. I need to be sure. But I'm willing to try. For Claire. For us. For the future. He squeezed my hand, and I saw the relief wash over his face. That's all I ask, he said. Just a chance. The seasons changed, and so did my life. I sold my share of the house to Robert, and I used the money to buy a small apartment of my own. It was nothing fancy, just a one-bedroom in a quiet building, but it was mine. I decorated it myself, choosing colors and furniture that reflected my taste, not his. I continued working at the shop, and I was making plans to expand. Susan and I were talking about opening a second location, and I was excited about the possibilities. I was building something of my own, something that was just mine. Claire had bought her own house, a small cottage on the edge of town. She was happy there, and she often invited me over for dinner. We would sit on her porch, sipping wine and watching the stars, talking about everything and nothing. One evening, she turned to me and said, Mom, I've been thinking. You've been through so much, and you've come out the other side. You're stronger than you've ever been. I'm so proud of you. I smiled, my heart full. I'm proud of you too, I said. We both made it. We both survived. Dad's been better too, she said, her voice careful. He's really trying, isn't he? He is, I said. He's not the same man who made those choices. He's changed. Are you and him? She trailed off, not sure how to ask. Are we getting back together? I finished. I don't know. We're taking it slow. One step at a time. But I'm not ruling it out. I'm not ruling anything out. She nodded, a small smile on her face. That's good, Mom. That's really good. The next time I saw Robert, I brought it up. We were having coffee at a small cafe near my apartment. Robert, I said, I've been thinking about what you said. About the future. About us. He set down his cup, his eyes fixed on me. And I'm not ready to say yes, I said. But I'm not ready to say no either. I want to keep going. I want to see where this takes us. But I need you to be patient. I need you to understand that this is going to take time. I have all the time in the world, he said. I'm not going anywhere. We continued our slow dance, a rhythm of dinners and walks and quiet conversations. It wasn't always easy. There were moments when the old hurt came rushing back, when I found myself questioning his motives, his sincerity. But each time, he proved himself. He was patient, kind, and honest. He was the man I had married, but he was also something more. He was a man who had been broken and had put himself back together. One night, he took me to a restaurant overlooking the river. It was the same restaurant where he had proposed to me all those years ago. I hadn't been there in decades. "Why did you bring me here?" I asked, my voice soft. "Because this is where it all started," he said. And I wanted to start again. Not the same way, but with the same promise. I promise to be honest. I promise to be faithful. I promise to spend the rest of my life earning your trust. I looked at him, this man who had hurt me so deeply, this man who had changed so much. I felt the walls around my heart begin to crumble. "Robert," I said, "I can't promise you that everything will be perfect. I can't promise that I'll never doubt you again. But I can promise you this, I'm willing to try. I'm willing to give us a chance." He reached across the table and took my hand, his eyes glistening with tears. "That's all I ever wanted," he said. "Just a chance." We didn't get married again. We didn't need to. We were both different people now, and we were building something new. Something that wasn't based on the past, but on the future. I kept my apartment, and he kept his. We were independent, self-sufficient, each with our own lives. But we were also together, sharing meals and walks and quiet evenings. It was a different kind of relationship, but it worked for us. Claire was happy. She had found a man who loved her, a kind and gentle man who treated her with the respect she deserved. They were talking about marriage, about children, about a future together. It was everything I had ever wanted for her. And me, I was content. I had my work, my home, my daughter, my life. I had survived the worst and come out the other side. I was stronger than I had ever been, more independent, more sure of myself. One evening, I sat on my small balcony, watching the stars come out. The air was cool and clean, and the city was quiet. I thought about everything that had happened, the betrayal, the pain, the struggle. And I thought about everything that had come after, the healing, the growth, the new beginning. Life wasn't perfect. It never was. But it was mine. I had built it with my own hands, on my own terms. And that, I realized, was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything. The sun was setting over the river, casting a warm golden glow across the water. Robert and I stood on the bridge, watching the light fade. It had been a year since the dinner at the restaurant, a year of slow, careful steps. A year of rebuilding. "I was thinking," Robert said, his voice soft, "about that night. The night I brought you to the restaurant. I was so scared you would say no. I almost did," I admitted. "But I'm glad I didn't." He turned to look at me, his eyes searching mine. "Do you ever regret it, giving me a chance?" I thought about it. I thought about the long nights, the difficult conversations, the moments when I had wanted to walk away. But I also thought about the good moments, the laughter, the shared meals, the quiet understanding that had grown between us. "Not once," I said. "You're not the same man who made those choices. You've changed. And so have I. We're different people now. We're better." He took my hand, his grip warm and steady. "I don't deserve you," he said. "I never did. But I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of you." "You already are," I said. "You already are." We stood in silence, watching the stars appear one by one. The city was quiet, the rush of the day finally settling into peace. I thought about Claire, about her new life, her new love. I thought about the shop, about the future I was building for myself. I thought about all the pain and all the healing, and I realized that I wouldn't trade any of it. It had made me who I was. "Robert," I said, "I don't know what the future holds. I don't know if we'll ever be what we were. But I know that I'm happy. I'm content. And that's enough." He squeezed my hand and smiled. "It's more than enough," he said. "It's everything." We walked off the bridge together, our steps slow and steady. The path ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid. I had survived the worst, and I had come out stronger. I had my daughter, my work, my home. And I had Robert, a changed man, a man who had learned the hard way that some things were worth more than money. Life would never be perfect, but it was mine, and that was all that mattered.